would he tell us about what it was like when the Chinese came into Haiphong, when they came in, the impression they made on him, what they did, and then the incident when they tried to take his gun away from him.
Cái quân vào cái cuối năm 1945 thì cái quân Tưởng Giới Thạch nó đã xuống đất Hải Phòng đấy. Lúc bây giờ thì tôi phụ trách ở cái khu C của thành phố, là bao gồm cái huyện Hải An cũ, Đông Khê đấy, Hàng Kênh, mấy cái nơi đó. Thế thì cái quân Tưởng Giới Thạch ấy thì hàng ngày nó cứ đi vào nó cướp phá nhân dân ta đấy. Nó thì chúng tôi theo dõi thì chúng tôi thấy nó là một cái loại người nghĩa là không hiểu lắm về cái sinh hoạt đâu. Nhiều anh là có vẻ là nông thôn ra thôi, cho nên là nhiều cái đứa nó rất là ngờ nghệch.
I enjoyed Shanghai, but I missed the life with the Chinese soldiers. So when I heard one day in the office that a small group of us was being organized to go to Haiphong, Indochina, now northern Vietnam, to coordinate U.S. shipping for the purpose of sending the Chinese army in Haiphong to the port of northern China, and the Japanese army there to Yokohama, Japan, I jumped at the chance and volunteered. Japanese soldiers were very curious about us, sat on small hills watching us, as they even invited us to take part in a small baseball game they had going. At one point, we stopped because a creek ran across the road. I got out of the Jeep and went forward to determine the depth of the water. While doing so, a Chinese soldier stole my field jacket, which was left in the Jeep. A Japanese soldier saw him, came running, shouting and pointing at the Chinese soldier. I returned quickly and retrieved my field jacket, wondering for the first time if perhaps we had been fighting on the wrong side.
Today is sad. Today we eat bitterness. China and America are friends.
Ho Chi Minh's headquarters was right across the street. One of our Chinese interpreters, Dexter Ye, came in our office and said that he had just come from Ho Chi Minh's birthday party going on across the street and wanted me to take part in it. Lord Mountbatten withdrew all British troops on January 1946, giving total control to General Leclerc. However, the last British battalion to leave Saigon was on March 29, 1946. Lord Mountbatten's main concern was to avoid a war between China and France, which he did. And now, it's just an insurgency he doesn't need to worry about. A day or two after the French had landed at Haiphong, I drove in the morning to Hanoi to pick up 3 Shanghai Chinese who were to join us as telegraphers and translators. I knew the road between Hanoi and Haiphong quite well, but this time it was different. A few villages along the road seemed empty. There was a quiet about it all. And I thought I noticed someone peeking at me from behind a building as I drove past the village. It had just turned dark when I picked up the 3 Chinese and we started down the road to Haiphong. Soon, Viet Cong soldiers jumped out in the road to stop us. I showed them my papers indicating who I was, prepared by the officials in Haiphong, and pointed to the American flag armband I wore. These armbands had been knitted for us by some French nuns, primarily to distinguish us from the French soldiers. The Chinese guarding the Hanoi citadel were reluctant to give their positions for relief to the French, as they did not expect a full frontal French occupation. But they allowed the French to rearm and take their positions anyway. No one applauded the Chinese efforts in obtaining the March 6th agreement and leaving the north in the following days. The force of 200,000 Chinese troops, mostly of Yunnanese origin, were despised collectively by both the French and Vietnamese as they went on 6 months of their looting and pillaging off the land that did not belong to them.
A truce was concluded. There were to be future negotiations to settle the problems between us and France. Under these conditions, we allowed a certain number of French troops to take the place of the nearly 200,000 troops of Chiang Kai-shek, which were to evacuate our country as soon as possible. So we had some breathing time to consolidate our forces.
Cho nên là thì lúc bây giờ thì cái bọn này chúng tôi thấy thì nó cũng là cái dân rất là ngu ngốc thôi, không có văn hóa gì lắm đâu. Cho nên là nó đi trong lúc nó vào nó cướp phá của nhân dân ấy, thì có nhiều lúc nó thấy cái bánh xà phòng thơm, nó tưởng là cái bánh ăn được thì nó cũng cắn miếng, rồi sau nhăn mặt nhăn mũi đi. Thế nó vào thì nó làm gì thì nó cướp của nhân dân, thấy cái gì đẹp đẹp thì nó cướp nó mang đi. Ví dụ như ngay đến vải vóc, quần áo đẹp ấy, thì nó cũng lấy nó mang đi. Riêng về tôi, lúc bây giờ tôi là cái cán bộ chính trị, là chủ nhiệm Việt Minh ấy, thì tôi có một khẩu súng lục Browning. Thế mà cái bọn này có một lần nó đi đến độ 7 thằng lính Tưởng Chế Thạch, và có một cái thằng quốc dân đảng người Việt Nam hướng dẫn đi. Nó vào trong làng đấy là nó cướp phá của nhân dân. Thì chúng tôi đến thì có can thiệp, khuyên chúng nó là không nên làm như thế. Nhưng mà nó mới hỏi tôi rằng thì là anh là cái người thế nào. Thì tôi nói rằng thì là tôi là cái cán bộ ở đây thôi. Thế thì nó mới đòi xem giấy, thì tôi không cho xem. Vì nó làm như thế là mất chủ quyền của mình, cho nên là tôi không cho xem. Thế thì cuối cùng thì nó cũng đoán rằng thì là tôi là cái người cán bộ thì có súng, cho nên nó muốn xô lại, nó lấy khẩu súng của tôi. Nhưng mà lúc bây giờ lực lượng tự vệ và thanh niên đứng ngăn nó, không cho nó làm cái việc đó. Cho nó thấy anh em tự vệ ra đông quá thì nó rút lui, nó không lấy được, nó không lấy được của tôi nữa. Thế là tôi yên tâm rồi, không có vấn đề gì.
After we were in Haiphong for about a month, we got word that the ships embarked to transport the Chinese and Japanese soldiers would be delayed for several months. We then immediately led the life of a desolate and a tropical island novel. We had nothing to do in all that heat but go to the ocean beach with French champagne or sit in the hotel lounge sipping a drink in the evening as the tropical night's humidity engulfed us. Not to much credit, I could not find a lot of first-hand accounts, or first-hand accounts at all, of how life really was in North Vietnam during those 6 months under Kuomintang Chinese occupation. So I am just going off from secondary sources claiming these claims, so bear with me. I'd like to personally believe that this is just an impression that is just slandering how it is for the sake of more important history. If troops were really undisciplined, how could they follow orders so well? I guess it would seem when they fight Mao's forces in a few years. The only strange incidents in boarding occurred when a Chinese soldier boarded who had gone AWOL rather than shipped north. When captured by the Chinese MPs and brought back, these soldiers would be beaten up, particularly around the head, and taken aboard the vessel for the shipment north. The reason most of these AWOLs occurred was because of a poor decision by the Chinese government to send the soldiers from the south of China to the north, and to keep the northern soldiers in the south, out of fear that a soldier sent near his home would go AWOL. The error in this was that the northern Chinese would likely have fought hard to save their province and homes from the communists. The soldiers from the south would have no such feeling for northern areas they were called upon to defend. French negotiators that tell the Chinese counterparts about the French troops coming in force. The treaty described the arrival of a relief as early as the first half of March. The chiefs of staffs under Chiang Kai-shek were informed about the imminent force coming in. The French demanded the Chinese give them arms, clear roads, and landing strips for planes. The Chinese initially refused in fear of reprisals from the Vietnamese population in Tonkin against the Chinese population. Chiang Kai-shek, however, resolved this dilemma himself. As the news came that the French ships were coming up the Red River to dock at Haiphong, 3 of us decided to go to our wireless transmitter about 4 blocks from the hotel to wire the French not to come up as they would be fired upon by the Chinese. The Chinese, in the meantime, were hurriedly building bunkers at the street corners and herding the Vietnamese civilians off the streets. 3 of us got in a Jeep with a big American flag on it and went on about 1 block. But by this time, the firing was so heavy that the bullets hitting the street looked like rain. The first landing craft of the French troops were shot up and turned back to their ships, which were also being hit. Warships returned fire with their guns. The Chinese wounded were being evacuated to aid stations and rickshaws. On June 15th, 1946, the last Chinese soldiers departed North Indochina. The Chinese army apparently delayed its departure in order to extract as much wealth as possible from their occupation. Of course, peace ends, war begins again, and peace begins again. From May to September, Ho spent months in France to try to guarantee that there will be independence and unification of Vietnam, but to no avail. Then, on June 1946, the French High Commissioner for Indochina, in an anime-like betrayal, creates the French-controlled Republic of Cochin China to the south. This caused violent clashes between the French and the Viet Minh, as the French bombarded Haiphong and forced Ho and the Viet Minh to retreat into the jungle. On December 19th, 1946, Hanoi is attacked by 30,000 Viet Minh insurgents. The course of history changes again. The First Indochina War begins. The voices are thrown from both sides. The resistance will be long and arduous, but our cause is just, and we will surely triumph, declares the Viet Minh commander Vo Nguyen Giap. If these people want to fight, they'll get it, French military commander General Eton Valois states. Why we expose ourselves like that, I cannot now imagine, except the obvious excitement of the foreign soldiers watching another army in action. But no longer will we go to the Vietnamese rallies, which were taking place around the city. We could easily have been assaulted by a mob. It was obvious that the long war in North Vietnam between the French and the Communist North was beginning. No more open air dances were held next to our hotel. The atmosphere from the time of our arrival 6 months before had totally changed. We were glad to see the ships start to arrive for transportation of the Japanese soldiers. The Japanese had always lived outside the city of Haiphong and kept to themselves. Spoiler alert! France loses, and both parties signed a treaty to end it all in 1954. After the French Indochina War, Ho Chi Minh and the Communist allies have no choice but to accept the treaty and give themselves a better opportunity, a better shot if you will, later on in achieving independence one day. And so the French and the Western allies, as well as the Viet Minh, agreed to divide Vietnam, not the 16th, but the 17th parallel between the capitalist South and the Communist North. Now, you know where this whole dividing Vietnam and the 17th parallel bullshit originated from. That's right, the Potsdam Conference. You know, it kind of reminds me of how Korea went from a straight 30th parallel line to becoming a symbolic yin-yang curved line as a border. That's the 30th parallel. But I don't know. The main goal of the DRV under Ho was to get rid of the Chinese. Distract the French. To buy themselves time. And to get rid of the reactionary Vietnamese groups supported by the Chinese as well. So the DRV can focus on making a Vietnamese army in a long war of resistance. The DRV simply asked for the Chinese troops to leave and the French to recognize their sovereignty. Of course, that's not how it usually goes. By prior Allied agreements at Potsdam, the Chinese theater had operational jurisdiction over Indochina north of the 16th parallel and the Southeast Asia Command south of that parallel. FDR dies 3 months before the Potsdam Conference. But his idea of trying to prevent France from occupying Indochina lives on. He fears Lord Mountbatten of Burma will try to instill colonial sympathies to France as he controlled Indochina. So he hopes Chiang Kai-shek and his Chinese forces cause disruption to that, balancing the power. Balancing the power. Remember, the year is 1946. It was still a time where people didn't see Stalin as an autocratic villain, as he is now, today, and where the US government much preferred a truce between the communists and the Kuomintang in China. Chiang Kai-shek and Truman at the time looked favorably at the Democratic Republic of Vietnam and hoped that the French government looked favorably into the Vietnamese independence. Communist nationalists were working uneasily with several non-communist nationalists, which end up tearing apart in the coming French Indochina War. When Ho left Haiphong for 4 months to try to convince France and the other Western allies to follow his plea for independence, Vo Nguyen Giap had prepared a war with France. With the departure of the Chinese army in June, Giap crushed the pro-Chinese nationalist groups in northern Vietnam, killing hundreds or thousands of their followers, and, despite a ceasefire, engaged the French when they attempted to expand their control out of the cities into the countryside. So pretty much he was Vietnamese Stalin. In an insurgent's point of view, it was sound to. Might as well take out the opposition before the road gets even more difficult for you. That'd be the smarter thing to do. But I personally would favor more diplomatic means. I mean, after all, the enemy is the French. Gotta get rid of them first. But we saw how China fared with the Japanese invasion a decade earlier, with a constant infighting between the communists and the Kuomintang groups alike. The Viet Minh, said historian Frederick Logoval, previously had genuine legitimacy and calling themselves a broad-based nationalist front, but were now synonymous with the communist movement. In light of the Ho Son-Tene Agreement, Ho Chi Minh was severely criticized by other nationalists for it. It offered Vietnam less than independence and only a provisional basis. However, it did prevent the French from taking Indochina so easily. So, no one was happy. A Chinese finger trap, so to speak. However, he reportedly said that, "I prefer to sniff French shit for 5 years than eat Chinese shit for the rest of my life." Which is not entirely true. Akin to Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake," or Paul von Little-Warbeck telling Hitler that he can go fuck himself, when it was actually that he did not put it kindly to the request of being governor from Hitler himself. Chinese army occupation of northern Indochina was traumatic for many people, and it was a relief for many people to see the last unit depart in September 1946. Yet the Chinese troop presence had prevented the French army from taking aggressive action against the DRV north of the 16th parallel. The DRV government, nascent National Guard, and Viet Minh mass organizations took advantage of this breathing space, which helps to explain why the French army on the return did not succeed in quelling the resistance. So there is indeed a connection to how the Chinese occupation allowed the Viet Minh to have a better chance of winning the first French Indochina War. Because just imagine, if the Chinese weren't given jurisdiction, it would just be given control to somebody else, and the outcome of the Vietnam War would have been way different. For better or worse, who the fuck knows? But we cannot deny, contrary to many historians in this matter, that this was very, very important. Essentially, the Chinese army that occupied north of Indochina were awful people to the residents there, ironically disciplined while being respectful to the civilians. It seems that they were not a professional army, but an army of desperate conscripts. But who can blame them? Were the communist troops in China any better? The situations in China, including famine, civil unrest, and international uncertainty, affected many Chinese directly or indirectly. Manipulated by both communist and nationalist occupiers, the mentality that dictated the people of not only China, but also Vietnam, Indonesia, and Korea was, if one had a simple life of having only their family and home to take care of, you have to do what it takes to survive, even if it means taking what you can, because in the climate of war, who knows where your fortune will end up. With the Chinese and Japanese armies gone, our job in Indochina was over, and we prepared to return to Shanghai. We had been there for 6 months, but with all that happened, it seemed a great deal longer. And this was not the end of it, as the Chinese, having a total personality change to be more socialistic, would befriend the coming-of-age communist country of Vietnam, exchanging supplies and weapons to the communist allies once they won the Chinese Civil War. But then to break the Sino-Vietnamese friendship in supporting the United States' friendliness towards communist China, melting it into an all-out conflict in the midst of the Vietnam War. The attitudes of the Chinese occupation from 1945 to 1946 was a small taste of what was the conflict to come, as the interaction and disgust between two different cultures of similar people is reflected in the violence between civilian and soldier, but most importantly, human and human. Two countries would both claim victory in a conflict that no one won for years to come. I can't help but feel that all history is important, and each individual moving part is integral in moving the machine, the giant machine of progress. Nevertheless, it just blows my mind. Never have I ever heard of a Kuomintang Chinese occupation of another country after becoming a victorious world power, as they were. Hell, I mean, winning this global conflict is how they got a seat in the UN Supreme Council in the first place. Of course, until it was taken by Communist China in 1970. But yeah, China was like a world power. And they did this for like half a year, and you people should know that. And I'm here to tell you. I know those Call of Duty crazy sci-fi scenarios would love to milk this shit for money, but they didn't. But perhaps you can come up with your own bullshit what-if scenarios out of this. What are you talking about? I should do that? Fuck no. My job is informing you about reality. Fantasy is your job. And with that, I say thank you for watching. Have a good night. And if you're just waking up in the morning, good morning. Go fuck yourself. I'm just kidding. Anyways, toodles.
C'est aussi ce qu'à Ceylan, en route vers l'Indochine, qui redevient française, affirme ses troupes que passent en revue avant leur départ pour Saigon, le général Leclerc. Ces hommes, dont certains ont participé à la campagne de Chine et se sont battus contre les Japonais, sont de ceux qui partent relever nos trois couleurs sur ces provinces livrées par Vichy à la voracité du Japon. Et Saigon voit arriver avec joie les uniformes de nos soldats. Toute une flotte battant pavillon français a convoyé ses troupes. Les récents événements n'ont pas changé l'esprit des Saigonais. En dépit des frictions et des malentendus, il reste une communauté franco-indochinoise. Et Leclerc aussi est arrivé à Saigon, sous une pluie intense, sous une de ces pluies comme on n'en voit qu'à l'époque de la mousson sous les tropiques. Le général Leclerc arrive là-bas pour signifier que la France et l'Indochine vont entreprendre ensemble la grande tâche. En nombre, aux troupes du Viet Minh continue à faire des progrès et à développer les centres assiégés au milieu des désastres que la France n'a pas voulu.
Đồng thời tại không gian Euro đã diễn ra một cuộc hội đàm hai phái đoàn Việt Nam và Pháp, nhưng không đi đến kết quả vì nước Pháp vẫn không chịu công nhận nền độc lập thống nhất của Việt Nam. Nhằm cứu vãn tình hình, Chủ tịch Hồ Chí Minh đã ký một hiệp ước với Bộ trưởng Bộ Quốc phòng Pháp, cố gắng để chiến tranh không xảy ra, tránh đổ máu cho cả hai dân tộc.
Jean-Étienne Valluy.
The time has come. Execute Order 66.
Thierry d'Argentlieu.
Zop.
The time has come. Execute Order 66.
Uncle Ho.